Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, in recent weeks we have had a series of events marking the 20th anniversary of the Big Bang enlargement of the European Union. I would like to use this occasion to share some thoughts with you about this anniversary and also to provide inputs for the discussion among stakeholders interested in the enlargement process of the next 20 years. The new EU member states experienced spectacular GDP growth in the 2000 to 2008 period, which was a kind of compensation for the dramatic losses of the 1990s. But since the great financial crisis, the Eastern growth was not so outstanding anymore, although some countries, like Romania, for example, only started to perform well in this period. It is important, therefore, that we do not only view the benefits of EU membership exclusively through an economic lens, but also in terms of political commitment to and cultural cohesion with a broader community of European nations. For the same reason, we also have witnessed a greater affection to further EU enlargement among the new member states, at least before the years of the war in Ukraine. Most people in the countries of the EU East are aware of the role structural and investment funds have played in their economic success. Indeed, that poorer EU countries can receive a net transfer amounting to 3 or 4% of their GDP is hugely important. But in itself, membership in the single market and the customs union should not be underestimated either. We have seen in the British case when losing these fundamentals resulted in a big drop in the growth potential of a country. Of course, an underdeveloped economy can grow without large-scale transfers of public resources as well. Private capital investment can also function as an engine of growth as long as a good growth plan exists. The benefit of EU cohesion policy does not reside exclusively in a net transfer of poorer countries, but also the fact that the EU compels these countries to take care of their own weaker sub-regions, and it also forces them to invest in human capital. Cohesion policy also helps participating in technology and climate policies of the EU, which would be very difficult otherwise at a lower average income level. EU funds for development and investment do not simply represent a certain sum of financial transfers, but also convey the philosophy of balanced and inclusive growth. Prosperity is supposed to be shared, which is also connected with the treaty-based concept of a social market economy. In this regard, the 20 years experience is somewhat controversial because of the growth of domestic territorial imbalances. For a change, cohesion policy would need to be reinforced and coupled with the 21st century industrial policy. A complex development of physical infrastructure, technology, enterprise and human capital would be needed in the regions lagging behind. Dear colleagues, for nearly a decade after the accession of Croatia, a kind of enlargement fatigue prevailed, which by now seems to have been overcome. Repeating the Big Bang enlargement, however, may not be so easy. The EU itself needs to be reformed, possibly through a treaty change, in order to accommodate many more countries. Today the EU is not only larger, but also much more complex than in the 1990s, and it will be a lot more tedious to reach consensus on all details among all the member states. To get the Western Balkans in, the entire voting system in all the institutions need to be rearranged, while the entry of Ukraine and Moldova would require a new model EU budget. Further enlargement will shortly happen, but it is unpredictable how fast or how slowly. Therefore, it makes sense to think about what happens in the meantime. European Council President Charles Michel said last year that by 2030 the EU must be ready for enlargement. This may be a realistic deadline, but the leaders at the institutions really need to be focused on this if they want to deliver and not disappoint in this regard. Last year, a French-German expert group put forward the idea of associate membership, which is certainly very interesting, and this might be a solution temporarily until the full membership becomes possible. But this status of the associate member would also need to be established by the treaty. By and large, this would mean participation in the customs union, like Turkey, for example, while meeting requirements of the rule of law and possibly also participating in the work of advisory bodies like the Committee of the Regions and the European Economic and Social Committee. The French-German group's report also wants to legalize the Eurozone as an entity and allow various countries to keep their currency even if they are inside the EU. Now, after speaking about the benefits of enlargement, we also must speak about some of the deficits. There are three areas of particular relevance, such as monetary questions, the social dimension, and the rule of law. One of these three, the social dimension, indeed needs to be highlighted. The EU enlargement in the past had a very weak social dimension. So it is not only from a monetary perspective that for some new member states the EU integration is incomplete, but also from the social point of view. To some extent, the eastern flank represents a second class where the welfare state is much weaker, and we can say the same about industrial relations. Collective bargaining only covers a minority of jobs, and consequently wage growth is not dynamic enough. The EU put forward a directive for minimum wage coordination to help in this regard, but much depends on the implementation. Because life expectancy is significantly lower in the East, and there is a massive flow of workforce from East to West, population decline has been a constant phenomenon among the new member states, with the exception of Poland. This has been particularly dramatic in Bulgaria. Workforce shortage tends to be a constraint on further dynamic GDP growth. Countries which until recently displayed hostility to immigration started to import workers from East Asia. This is definitely a new experience for most of them, and it is important to manage this process well to avoid tensions and controversies in the future. Dear friends, finally, let me say a few words about the future of cohesion. Cohesion policy is very essential for the functioning of the single market and therefore the European Union as a whole, but it should not be seen as a panacea for all ills. There should be no doubt about the importance of upgrading it in order to face the challenges of the coming period. We are speaking here about the main instrument of shared prosperity in the EU. A new report from the high-level group on the future of cohesion policy, of which I was a member last year, advocates for a revamped policy to address today's structural challenges. It stresses the need for a cohesion policy that, while keeping its focus on economic, social, and territorial cohesion, understands the need to combine competitiveness and inclusivity. It also argues that policies should focus on place-based strategies, partnerships, and systemic reform and simplification, and needs to work in concert with other EU and national policies and initiatives. The report underscores the critical role of cohesion policy in ensuring that no European is left behind. Regarding enlargement, the report speaks about cohesion policy as a fundamental ingredient of a successful integration of new members. This is a policy that, as in previous cases, can lay down the foundations for economic development and institutional capacity building. But this will imply customizing cohesion policy to meet the unique needs of each candidate country, even before membership. In these cases, and to complement the limitations of the enlargement policy, the policy must focus not only on basic investment, but also on strengthening institutional capacities and civil society which are crucial for effective public policies and sustainable development. Aligned to other EU instruments for the Western Balkan region, including the latest €6 billion gross plan for the Western Balkans, cohesion policy can further contribute to building better institutions, improving multi-level governance of candidate countries, and prepare them for EU membership requirements. Furthermore, as enlargement will also have implications for current EU members, additional funds to support regions in current member states affected by changes in international value chains and labor migration will also be required. However, the challenges, particularly regions requiring significant reconstruction, highlight the limitations of relying solely on cohesion policy. Targeted interventions and additional funding will be essential to address the most pressing issues effectively. Soon, the European Union will have to roll out a colossal reconstruction program for Ukraine. But when that comes, the easternmost regions of the EU itself in Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria should also be beneficiaries of that. The strategic importance of enlargement for the EU calls for a concerted effort from policymakers and member states to ensure a successful expansion, reaffirming the Union's values and objectives and leveraging cohesion policy as a key instrument for a more prosperous and cohesive Europe in which no citizen and no region is left behind. Thank you very much for your attention.